It's been decades since the original Ghostbusters saved New York City. Join us for a thrilling glimpse into Ghostbusters, Afterlife. Somerville, Oklahoma, the Ecto-1 bursts out of a mine belonging to Shandor Mining as Egon Spengler is being chased by an unseen spectral entity. He makes it back to his house and attempts to spring a huge ghost trap on it, but the trap fails when he cannot activate it. Egon runs back into the house and prepares himself, but the ghost gets Egon in his chair and kills him. Meet Callie Spengler, a struggling single mom, and her two teenagers, Trevor and Phoebe. Facing financial difficulties, they're forced to move to a rundown farmhouse inherited from Callie's estranged father, the one and only Egon Spengler, a founding member of the Ghostbusters. The family makes it to Egon's house, which everyone in town just knew as the home of the dirt farmer since he was such a recluse. The house is a dump, but Callie hopes they can make it their new home. They are met by Janine, who informs Callie that Egon left them saddled with a lot of debt, with Janine having been the one to take care of bills. Callie later takes the kids to get dinner at a burger shop, where Trevor goes in to apply for a job. He is instantly smitten with an older girl named Lucky, who works there. When they return home, Phoebe notices her chessboard and pieces all scattered on the ground, so she resets them before going to bed. Meanwhile, Trevor walks around outside and goes to the barn where he discovers the Ecto-1. In the morning, Phoebe finds that one of the chess pieces moved, so she moves one of her own pieces. Phoebe starts summer school, where she meets her teacher, Mr. Gruberson, and her classmate Podcast, who has a supernatural podcast. Phoebe goes to Gruberson's office, where she learns that he is a seismologist and has been monitoring seismic activity coming from somewhere in town over the last few years. Phoebe and Podcast later walk toward the mines, where they find what looks like an old skeleton of a monster. Later at night, Phoebe sees that the chess pieces move again, and when she moves her own piece, the ghost in the room knocks her piece off the board. She looks around the house some more and finds Egon's PKEs, meter, and an old ghost trap. Back at school, Phoebe brings the ghost trap and shows Podcast, but Gruberson, being a Ghostbuster fan, fascinated shows Phoebe and Podcast a video of the original Ghostbusters after they saved Manhattan from destruction in the 80s, and Phoebe learns that her grandfather was a Ghostbuster. Gruberson takes them outside the school to see how the trap works, but they accidentally unleash a monstrous ghost that flies toward the Shandor mine. Gruberson takes Phoebe and Podcast back home, where it appears there is some chemistry between Callie and Gruberson. The kids go through more of Egon's stuff, finding a book about Gozer the Gozerian, the same evil ancient entity that terrorized Manhattan all those years ago, as well as the knowledge of Gozer being freed by the gatekeeper and keymaster. Meanwhile, Lucky invites Trevor to go out with her friends to hang out at the mines, where they find one of the ghostly entities bursts out and flies away. Phoebe takes the PKE meter and goes to the barn, where she comes across Egon's old workspace and computer room. She finds his old uniform with his name on it and soon realizes that the ghost that's been following her is Egon. She fixes up one of his devices before returning to her room. When Phoebe later asks Callie what kind of scientist Egon was, she brushes him off with resentment for abandoning her and her mother. In the morning, Phoebe brings Egon's old proton pack to show Podcast as they test out the beam, which turns out to still be powerful. They then hear a noise coming from inside a building, and they find a blue blobby ghost that they name Muncher. They fire the proton beam at Muncher, causing him to fly away. They chase after the ghost just as Trevor rides in after having fixed up the Ecto-1 and taking it out for a spin. He picks up Phoebe and Podcast as they chase after Muncher, with Phoebe sitting in the car's retractable seat and continuing to fire the proton beam at Muncher. The three chase Muncher outside of town, going toward the mine, using a remote-controlled trap to catch the ghost. As they are driving back, they are caught and arrested by Sheriff Domingo. Phoebe uses her one phone call to contact Ray Stantz, who runs an occult antique shop out of the former Ghostbusters headquarters. When Phoebe mentions Egon, Ray says he can rot in hell until Phoebe mentions he is dead, at which point he feels remorse. Ray explains to Phoebe that Egon had a major falling out with him and the other Ghostbusters before he retreated to Somerville with every single bit of their old equipment. The last time Ray spoke to Egon, he mentioned some crazy talk about the apocalypse. Phoebe manages to tell Ray she is Egon's granddaughter before Domingo makes her hang up. Gruberson keeps walking until he finds Vince, the keymaster, in the aisle. He runs for his life, but the beast chases Gruberson all the way to his car and attacks him. The next day, Phoebe and Podcast bring Trevor and Lucky to the mine to do more investigating. They find a temple with a statue of Gozer, plus the preserved body of Ivo Shandor, a cult leader devoted to Gozer. There are years marked on the walls from various seismic events over the decades, and it looks as though Shandor was preparing to reawaken in the current year for Gozer's return. Another earthquake happens, but the kids discover the source, a ghostly portal underneath a trap Egon built to keep Gozer and other evil ghosts at bay. Callie finds the PKE meter and comes across Egon's lab and eventually realizes his ghost is there too. He has been keeping up with her growing up, with pictures and news articles of her all over his wall. Unfortunately, she is found and attacked by Zool, the gatekeeper. The kids return home to find Callie possessed by Zool. She becomes feral and attacks them, while Gruberson, now possessed by Vince Clortho, disables Egon's trap, leading to many evil ghosts to be set free into Somerville. The kids go to Egon's lab and get his equipment and uniforms to try and stop Gozer themselves. While this goes on, Zool and Vince Clortho gather to summon Gozer. The new Ghostbusters drive toward the site of the chaos as Zool and Vince bring forth the old temple and revive Gozer's human form. Shandor awakens and tries to appease the evil ghost, but Gozer tears Shandor in two pieces. The four arrive to fight back, with Podcast managing to weaken Zool and break Callie free from her possession by trapping Zool. Gozer is temporarily weakened, but the trap malfunctions and Zool possesses Lucky, allowing Gozer to regain power. She tries to kill Callie and the other kids until someone calls out, the original Ghostbusters Ray, Peter Venkman, and Winston Zeddemore arriving to help out. Phoebe attempts to get Gozer on her own, at which point Egon's ghost materializes and helps her hold it right. He stands alongside his former friends and partners, and together with Trevor and Podcast, they manage to activate the trap to consume Gozer, Zool, and Vince. Trevor helps break Lucky out of the shell that was once Zool, along with Gruberson coming out of the Vince Clortho shell. The old Ghostbusters talk to the new ones, and Venkman acknowledges that Phoebe really is Egon's granddaughter. Egon's ghost looks at his friends as they reconcile for their earlier feud, and Callie is able to finally hug her father before he crosses over. The old Ghostbusters return to New York City in the Ecto-1. In the mid-credits scene, Venkman is seen married to Dana Barrett's Sigourney Weaver, who is doing his old electroshock test on him. Post-credits scene, a flashback is shown, a deleted scene from the original movie, of Egon giving Janine a coin. In the present day, she shows the coin to Winston, who is making arrangements to have the old headquarters and Ecto-1 restored. Meanwhile, one of the ghost containment units starts to glow red. Ghostbusters became a pop culture phenomenon, a hilarious adventure that combined scares and laughs. So the next time you want to remember a movie or show, remember, who you gonna call? Flicks and TV.